Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to highintensitybusiness.com. This is episode 301, and today's topic is workout design. Today's guests are exercise scientists, Dr. James Fisher, and Discover Strength founder and CEO, Luke Carlson. Welcome back, guys. Great to have you on the podcast again.
Yeah, Lawrence, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having us, and it's always a pleasure to be on your show, on your podcast with James.
I think you guys almost weren't sure who to speak first to that, in case you spoke over one another, which was quite funny. So I probably should have addressed each of you separately. So in this podcast, we're going to focus on workout design. Now, the reason this topic's been prompted is because as part of kind of working on our personal training business here in Ireland, Optima Strength, been thinking a bit about workout design and in terms of like our process of workout design. So when we hire someone, when we have a client come in the door and we need to design a program for them, what are the principles, what are the things we go through, the steps in order to make sure that workout design is going to be appropriate for them. And obviously there's a lot of debate in fitness, in high intensity training about what an optimal workout looks like. And this is highly nuanced, and I'm sure we could all do like an entire day's podcast on this one topic alone. But I guess to keep things kind of more focused, I guess the kind of brief that I'm looking at when I'm thinking about workout design in the context of this podcast is a design plan to meet a healthy client's needs in terms of helping them achieve maximum results for strength and hypertrophy. So optimizing their appearance and getting all the wonderful benefits that we know exercise delivers. What does that program look like? I'd love to hear both your perspectives on this, because I think you'll be coming at this from slightly different angles, which will be really interesting. Luke, could you start off just by giving a kind of a summary on the thinking, the process behind workout design at Discover Strength?
Maybe you should have James go first, because I have my fire alarm testing going on, so it's a little bit loud. It's okay if James starts with this. They're telling me not to exit the building, so I'll mute and let James go first.
Cheers.
Okay, thanks, Luke. So I think that's a really interesting question, and I know that HIIT has been criticised a little bit by being a one-size-fits-all, the same workout applied to everybody. Which in some cases is absolutely fine. I'm going to take the approach that I take with my students, in fact, actually. So what I'm going to say is that preceding every workout should be some form of client consultation. And that should identify primarily the client goals. So you said strength and hypertrophy and all the health benefits and aesthetics. Well, I would argue that that's a number of goals. So I would probably want a priority in that. If their goal is aesthetics, whether that's weight loss or muscle gain, that might be slightly different from maximal strength. So if they said, I want to improve my strength on a chest press or a leg press or lower body, upper body, that then becomes quite specific. If they just say, I want to feel better, I want to function better, I'm aging and I don't want to age, which is a common response, then that's kind of a one. Then we can maybe take a bit more of a one-size-fits-all. But I think an initial client consultation with their goals is key. From there, I think that we need to identify any previous or existing injuries. And from there, I would say we need to look at what do they like and what don't they like. Because I think we could turn away a lot of clients if they come through the door and their goals are, so let's say, upper body muscle mass. And the first thing we have them do is, a leg press and an abduction, adduction, knee extension, when it might transpire that they hate training their lower body. So I think we need to look at goals, injuries, and enjoyment as a priority in any program design.
Yeah, I love that. I thought it was actually a really good response. And I guess, when we do come to talk about like heuristics and actual workout design examples, maybe, I like the idea of addressing a client, that other example you mentioned there when they said, I just want to reverse aging or stop aging. Because a lot of the comments I get in initial consultations are, I just want to enjoy my life. I just want to be fit. I just want to be healthy. I don't want to have pain. So it's they don't really care about, big biceps and, being like ripped and all of this kind of thing. It's more about just functional ability and quality of life. So maybe we can address that. But Luke, has your fire alarm drill finished now? Can you answer that one?
Yeah. So I'll approach it just a little bit differently. I think there's a continuum of kind of what high intensity training practitioners have done over the last 25 years or maybe 30 years in terms of volume, and then we can get into exercise selection. On one end of the spectrum, and it's actually the newer end of the spectrum, it's a big 5 approach. 5 exercises, compound movements, very abbreviated approach, very minimal dose approach to the strength training workout. Now, high intensity training in its roots was much more volume, maybe 20 exercises. And I think the people that were responsible for really spreading and proliferating high intensity training are the strength and conditioning coaches like Mike Gittleson at University of Michigan and Dan Riley at Penn State, and then the Washington Redskins and Houston Texans. And they were looking at 20 to 22 exercises in a workout, and that was high intensity training. But that represented much less volume than what everybody else was doing. It was 20 or 22 sets, and just to be clear, 4 of those sets were neck, right? A neck flexion extension, lateral flexion left, lateral flexion right, maybe a shrug. So you've already done 5 sets before you've gotten to anything else. And there was always a leg press and a leg curl and a leg extension and generally a calf and generally something around the adductor and abductor. And for shoulder work, there was always something for the posterior deltoid, something for the external rotators, a shoulder press of some kind, usually a lateral raise as well, usually a single joint and a multi-joint for every other major muscle compartment. So more volume overall, specific grip work, definitely a single joint bicep, definitely a single joint tricep in almost every workout. So that's the other end of the spectrum. For our purposes, we've probably fallen right in the middle of that continuum. 10 to 12 exercises overall, a little bit more comprehensive, and that we're going to use single joint movements and try to cover, just be more comprehensive in our approach. Now, what's the right answer between the big 5 approach and 22 exercises? Well, I mean, I don't know if there is a perfect approach. Our lens on this is what produces the best results, what creates long-term client retention. And when I say client retention, I'm not talking from, it's a business standpoint. I mean, what engages you in your training for the long haul. If you look at me and say, Luke, you have to strength train for the next 50 years of your life. And I say, okay, got it. And by the way, you're going to do 5 exercises and they're going to be the same 5 for the next 50 years of your life. Like, that sounds boring already. So when I say client retention, I mean, how do we create exercise stimulus that makes you excited for your workout? Because I think, hard to measure this, the fervor and excitement for your own workout is correlated with the results that you're going to see. A lot of times we see a stagnation in results because people are just frankly bored with their own workout. And how do you find a way over the long haul to have the same level of interest and excitement and enthusiasm for the workout and then for the set that you're about to perform? And that's where I think some of these variations in protocol and advanced techniques and just variation in the actual exercise tool that you're using maybe matters.
Yeah, that was great. And I love what you said there about how the novelty side of it, the changing things up, adding new exercises, advanced techniques, etc. It's not just about providing novelty for excitement's sake. It's for actually potentially, like you say, helping to motivate someone to continue to train at a high level of effort, right? I'd love to get into, I'm glad you started talking about, the 2 ends of the continuum there, the big 5 versus the 20 plus exercise routine. Let's talk to James about this. So James, what's your kind of latest thinking as it pertains to just looking at the physiological benefits? So not necessarily looking at what's going to, generate greater retention and adherence, but what's just going to deliver maximum benefits. How do you currently think about, a big 5 kind of, or big 3 sort of minimalist routines versus much higher volume routines in terms of adaptations?
Yeah, it's a great question. First thing, I think Luke was absolutely right in what he said, and let's be absolutely clear on something. The best workout is the workout people will do, because if they won't do it, then it's no good for anybody. And whether that's a product variety or techniques or whatever, that's key. Where's my thinking on sort of volume? Well, I think that for probably the most, if we take the importance of efficiency and we take the adaptations that we want, I think you can probably do what I cited in a paper as a minimal dose approach, which was 3 exercises: an upper body push, an upper body pull, and a lower body multi-joint. And in the paper, we suggest those as a chest press and a row rather than overhead movements, which might have some degree of shoulder impingement, especially as we age. So shoulder flexion, extension, and lower body multi-joint. And I think you can then start to add to that based on personal preference, based on health importance. So somebody with low back pain, we might actually say the next exercise we add is a lumbar extension. Then the next exercise we add is a neck extension. Then the next exercise we add is a leg extension, or an overhead press, or a vertical pull, vertical press, vertical pull. So you start to build up a profile of a workout in that way. I think that you can definitely get away with probably a very minimal approach of sort of three exercises. I don't think that you would be optimizing hypertrophy if you did that, and I think you'd be only optimizing strength in those exercises. But I think that even those 3 exercises would be a great addition to most people's lives who are currently inactive.
Yeah. So let me just follow up on that. So, okay, so, if you're looking at what a template might look like for a program, then, if you're trying to maximize adaptations, you want to maximize hypertrophy, well, I know strength is a bit dicey, but let's just talk about muscle mass. And then we know that by doing that, you're pretty much going to deliver on all the other benefits that we all know and love from high intensity training. What does what is the, not necessarily the minimum effective dose, but like the big 3, but what does that workout look like then? Like, again, I know there's so many variations, but is it 5 exercises? Is it 8 exercises? Is it 10 exercises? Like, what do you think that looks like?
Okay.
Lawrence, can we add on to that question? And can we have James, when he answers it, just tell us what his last maybe 2-3 workouts were, exercise by exercise? Because I always think that is really insightful, right? I mean, what is James actually doing in his own workouts?
Yeah, and let me just add one more thing. That'd be great, Luke. Thanks for that. So one other thing is I just want to look at this through the lens of adaptations, right, James? So let's forget, because obviously I completely agree with Luke in terms of adherence and retention, all of that, and just excitement. But just talking about the physiological adaptations.
Okay, so I think that you you said hypertrophy. Yeah,
as one, yeah.
Okay, so let's take hypertrophy as a goal. Well, if we take the evidence at face value, the evidence suggested around 9 sets per week per muscle group, and I don't think there's any reason to disagree with that. It's quite funny. The high volume group seem to think that that's exactly what you need to do, and yet the low volume group seem to think that's a pretty adequate number as well. So I think that's a good starting point. So the key thing around that is, how frequently do you want to train? So if I was a trainer and I have a client coming to me, or if you said to me, you can only train once per week, I would do more volume in that workout than I typically do right now. If you said to me, you can't do any other exercise through the week, so you're going to become almost sedentary every day, you're going to sit at a desk, you can't go for a run, you're going to take less than 5,000 steps, you can't go for a bike ride, you can't do any other exercise, what does your workout want to look like? I'd probably say I want to split it down so that I can lift weights as many days as I can. And as a product of that, I'd probably do very, very low volume in each workout, low volume being 3 to 5 exercises, probably 3 to 4 times per week. So I think that's the first thing. The volume in each workout, based on the number of exercises we do, has to be in consideration of the frequency in which we train. If you typically say a high intensity advocate trains once to twice a week, say with, let's say, 4 to 5 days in between, I think probably 10 to 12 exercises is absolutely appropriate, and maybe even a couple more. And that would include multi-joint for for overhead press and chest press, vertical pull, horizontal pull, and lower body. So there's five multi joints there, and then I would add in single joints for other muscle groups as is appropriate. So, for example, I know that Luke will always look at abduction and adduction, and it's not that I don't think that they are valuable exercises. They're not exercises I would prioritize in my workout, purely because they're not muscles that I would see day to day. So I would much rather add in a single joint bicep and a single joint tricep than a hip abduction and hip adduction. And I would express that to a trainer who was trying to encourage me the other way, because I'd say, for my enjoyment, I want to do these exercises.
Yeah. And that's awesome. So do you want to answer Luke's point on your last few workouts, just to give the audience some context?
Yeah. So I basically set up, during the whole COVID sort of situation, I basically set up a bit of a home gym, and I've actually just recently moved house earlier this month. And we have painted our garage and laid matting down and converted it to a bit of a home gym for myself and my wife. So I've got a weights bench and a few free weights and pull-up bars and so forth. So bear in mind, I'm limited by what I have access to. I certainly don't have access to the equipment that you guys do. But if we take it up in context, it's a multi-joint horizontal press. So I do an incline dumbbell press, but effectively that's a multi-joint chest press. I do vertical pull, so pull-ups, and that's a personal preference for me. I particularly like the challenge of doing pull-ups. I particularly like the lifting of my own body weight. I always think it's a good gauge as my body weight changes, that my strength has to adapt to that. I do, let me think. I do a Romanian deadlift. That's probably one of my staple exercises, which is often done with either a barbell or with dumbbells. So primarily hamstring and glute and hip extension exercise. But I think that's a good postural muscle for keeping the rhomboids tight in an isometric contraction, the shoulders back, chest up. So again, it's about the technique of the way it's performed as much as the exercise itself. I tend to do a multi-joint lower body, like a split squat. So rear foot elevated split squat exercise. I do a knee extension exercise. And I often put in what's called a sissy squat, which is probably painfully most akin to a wall sit based on the leverage of your body. But it's dynamic rather than static. And then I would add in around that maybe some dumbbell flies, maybe a narrow grip bench press, maybe press ups. I have a TRX hanging, so a suspension trainer. So a TRX row is another multi-joint back exercise, back biceps exercise, but it's horizontal rather than vertical. And then I would probably add in some kind of tricep single joint, like a skull crusher or a press down, and single joint biceps in the form of maybe an incline dumbbell press or a preacher curl or a standing biceps curl. Mm-hmm. And then around that, I should add, and then around that, I would probably add in 45-degree Roman chair, side bends, and some form of abdominal exercise, whether it's a plank and side plank or McGill crunches or something like that.
Let me ask you a really direct question, because one thing I've realized as we're discussing this is such a vast topic. Like, it almost needs to be broken down into multiple podcasts. But one of the things I'm just really fascinated about, and sorry if this is a little bit shifting gears, is when it comes to the adaptations, multi-joint versus single joint. Let's talk about the lower body, right? So like on when Luke described the continuum, he's talking about the big five. You know, a lot of trainers, a lot of operators, owners will literally just utilize like a Med-X leg press, let's say, for a lower body exercise. Whereas, Luke and Discover Strength will use abduction, adduction, calf raise, leg press, maybe other things I'm not thinking about. And it's really interesting to me, like, when it comes to, again, just looking at the physiological adaptations, right? Not the mental focus or the motivational adherence to exercise. Do we really need to do that much work on the lower body, or is the leg press going to suffice? What's your latest thinking around that?
If I answer quickly and then defer to Luke, actually, because he will have a rationale for why he includes these exercises, and I'm interested to hear it. So for me, there are two main lower body exercises. There's a multi-joint of some kind, and there's a knee extension. And the knee extension primarily because as we reach full extension in the multi-joint lower body, we don't train the vastus medialis muscle as well because we're reaching extension. And if we go too far, we lock out. So, and that muscle is a key muscle in stabilizing the knee joint itself. Other muscles I think are important, tibialis anterior, gastrocnemius, abductors, so forth. But those are the two primary ones for me personally. So I'm interested to hear Luke's thoughts.
Just before Luke responds, sorry, Luke, I know I do want to hear from you on this. So are you saying that the leg press though should stimulate the remaining quadricep? It's just the vastus medialis that it kind of neglects a little bit. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, so the vastus medialis, which is really the teardrop on the inside of our lower thigh, is really only activated in the last sort of 15 degrees of knee extension, or is primarily activated in the last 15 degrees of knee extension. So we need to do something where our knee is reaching full extension, and we can't do that with a multi-joint. We can't do that with a squat or with a leg press, because as we reach full extension, we lock out and we unload the quadriceps, unload the skeletal system anyway. So yeah, so that's my reason for incorporating the knee extension exercise.
Love it. Luke, go ahead.
That was really insightful, James, because I've never looked at it that way. I would say for literally the last 20 years, if I picked a single joint that you could skip if you were doing a leg press, I would have actually said leg extension, because I thought there was so much quadricep involvement in the leg press that I thought, well, do leg press, you got to do a leg curl, you got to do an adductor and abductor, and you got to do calf, and if you care, you got to do some tibialis anterior, because I thought there was enough quadricep stimulation on a leg press. That's really interesting insight. And Lawrence, our approach is, if you're going to train, it doesn't take that much more time to be a little bit more comprehensive. Why would we not be more comprehensive? And if it was an additional 2 hours a week of work to be more comprehensive, then I would suggest, okay, maybe a leg press is fine. But it's a matter of a few minutes of additional work. And this is really unscientific. But if you take somebody through a really, really productive set of adductor or abductor or single joint hamstring or clearly calf or tibia, and you ask them, do you feel like you had similar stimulation on the leg press and those muscle compartments? The answer is absolutely not. I mean, that adductor was brutally hard, and I was recruiting, musculature that I've just never recruited before. And I would apply that to all the aforementioned single joints that I just mentioned. So that's our rationale for being just a little bit more comprehensive. Now, I definitely think that a leg press and a leg press only gets you 90% of the way there. I would say, 75% of the non-recorded workouts that I'll take someone through will just have a leg press. I mean, if James showed up here tomorrow morning and said, I'm looking for a Christmas Eve workout in our new facility, the workout literally may be 8 upper body exercises and just a leg press. And we may do 8 upper body exercises and then finish with a leg press and just try to devastate him on leg press. And I know that's, we're going to get most of the way there. And I think about all the workouts that Jim Flanagan has taken me through, and they literally mirror what James Fisher just said. It's usually a leg extension and a leg press, and that is it. And then it's 6, 7, 8, 9 upper body exercises.
I think there's something really interesting to add to that, because if I reflect now on my own workouts, I'm trying to cover the bases that Luke can cover. So we've talked about single joints for each of those. When I do a split squat, some people will say, well, that's a quad exercise. Others will say that's a hamstring exercise. Others will say that's a glute med exercise because of the instability, or an adductor exercise. So that certainly covers a lot of bases. Now, I'm not a huge fan of instability exercises, but I simply don't have the loads to do a squat or a heavy dumbbell. So I choose a Romanian deadlift or a heavy deadlift, a Romanian deadlift because of the hamstrings, and then a split squat for the kind of the multi-joint. Sticking with the same thing, I would argue that if I was going to do a lower body workout and I had to lose one exercise, I would lose the multi-joint in favor of all of those single joint. And one of the reasons is, and Luke's absolutely right, and Luke's clients are absolutely right, the research suggests there is far more fatigue and far more soreness from a single joint movement than there is from a multi-joint movement. Probably because the distribution of the load is spread equally amongst the muscles. So, for example, there was a study, it dates back to 2015, and if I recall correctly, it was a row exercise compared to a bicep curl exercise. But they found quite a big disparity in the peak torque deficit, in the fatigue in the biceps between the row and between the bicep curl exercise, and even in the muscle soreness at like 24, 48, and 72 hours. So I think a single joint will get you a lot more for a specific muscle. The flip side, and forgive me carrying on talking, is metabolically, and I think we've all been there, metabolically, a leg extension and a leg curl are not going to get you what a leg press is going to get you. So I've never had my heart rate at 200 beats per minute by doing knee extensions, but I would bet that if I went in front of Luke's staff at Discover Strength and did a leg press to avenge a leg press to failure, then my heart rate would be way above my age predicted max.
Yeah, and obviously that's just because you're involving so much musculature in the leg press, right?
Absolutely.
It's funny, right? Because it's so obvious when you say it. Like, obviously, you're going to feel less stimulation or less soreness or less, I don't know, sensation, let's say, in the individual muscles when doing a leg press, because it's going to be shared over all the musculature for the most part, obviously varying sort of percentages, I suppose. So that does make a lot of sense hearing you say that. I'm just curious, is there any research that shows that compares, leg press adaptations versus, because what would answer the question really well, just from a physiological point of view, would be, a straight compare between a leg press and say a 5 single joint exercise on the lower body that address similar muscles and look at muscle hypertrophy and things like that.
There's nothing that I'm aware of. The closest that I know of around that is a study by Fonseca, which is a relatively famous study now, where they looked at people doing the same exercise versus with the same load versus various exercises with the same load versus various exercises with varying load. So I think, but even the same exercises were not. I can't remember whether it was just one multi-joint or whether it was 2 multi-joints, like a squat and a deadlift. But certainly they found the best adaptations across all the muscle groups of the quadricep were from multiple exercises, which included a squat, a deadlift, a lunge, and I think a knee extension, compared to just a squat and a deadlift alone, I think it was. I would need to check the details of the paper. So if anybody listening knows the study and I'm misciting it, then please forgive me.
Sounds good. Luke, this is my idea for, I guess, the next stage of this. What I'd love to hear is how, I know we touched on this in our last podcast in terms of virtual, like how you think about workout design, but I guess it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on workout design more generally. I don't know how much that might change. How your trainers might select exercises for a client. Again, let's just use someone who just wants to, achieve optimal functional ability, quality of life, those types of outcomes. And then I'd love to see if there's anything James would challenge or question or do differently in terms of that design. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's great. Now, remember, my answer is we think this is the best prescription, but we also need some level of consistency. So if for some reason you had a facility that didn't have a tibialis anterior machine, then fine. If you don't do tibialis, that's okay. What drives me crazy is if you have the machine and you're going to do it for an extended period of time for a 3-month block, why would you stop doing it for the next 3 months? Because how do you look at your trainee and say, it was really important for the last 3 months, and now it's not important anymore? And that drives me crazy. So I think you're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. If it's a muscle group that's not covered in a different way. If you want to say we're doing a single joint hamstring for the next 3 months, and the next 3 months we're not going to, that's actually okay, because we're going to get some hamstring in any other hip extension movement that we're doing, if that makes sense. So for us, it's, you have to cover 7 movements. You have a leg press of some kind, all right, or a multi-joint leg of some kind. It could be a ball squat. It could be a walking lunge. It's generally a leg press. Is there a single joint knee extension? And then is there a leg curl? Adductor, abductor. And again, we do abductor in a lot of different ways. It could be manual resistance, could be a machine, could be with bands. And then are we doing some type of plantar flexion, so calf? And we're not super specific on, does it have to be a straight leg calf or a bent knee calf, which is different musculature? And then are we using the tibialis anterior? So that's really 7 movements overall that we have to cover between 2 different routines, or sometimes 3 different routines, but you have to cover those. That's literally on a checklist that when the trainer, every trainer that designs a workout, another trainer has to review it, and it's a peer review process and has to approve it. And if you're missing one of those, there better be a reason. Like, hey, there's an injury that precludes someone from using an anterior tibialis machine. So that's the lower body. Then the upper body, the things that we have to include, clearly we're going to include some pushing and pulling movements, or some anterior and posterior. So it doesn't have to be a pushing movement. It could be single joint only. It could be pec flies only. And for the posterior side, it could be pullovers and rear delt machines only. But generally, it's going to be pushing and pulling. There's no rules on, do you have to have a single joint bicep or single joint tricep, because we're going to get enough bicep and tricep stimulation by pushing and pulling. We'll still include it, but you don't have to include it. We say you have to include a shrug, because it's really tough to probably really get good trapezius involvement. Now, if someone has issues with shrug causes a headache, then we'll do like a scapular retraction exercise on a row, and there's probably some trap involvement there, and we'll call that the trap exercise. But I need to see a designated trap exercise, and generally it's going to be shrug. And then there has to be comprehensive midsection training. So there has to be something that's really focused on rectus abdominis, something on the lumbar extensors. So that's going to be on a Roman chair, or it's going to be on a medic's low back. And then the medic's torso rotation is how we're going to train the internal, external obliques. So the upper body is a little bit easier, because with a few pushes and pulls, we're probably going to cover everything. As long as we include the trap exercise as well. I think the lower body is where we're a little bit more methodical on, hey, you actually missed adductor. Why don't you have adductor in here? We got to get adductor in here. And I think all of this, Lauren, stems from, I used to work for a really, really good, really long tenured, bright, high intensity training practitioner. And when we designed workouts, we only did 3 leg exercises and 2 routines. So it's 3 leg exercises one day, and one was always a leg press. The other workout was 3 leg exercises. One was always a leg press. That leaves you 4 exercises to cover everything else. So you'd go a full round of workouts not doing adductor, or not doing calf, or not doing something. And the next round you do it. And I thought, I can't look at a client and say, I'm going to coach the heck out of your adductor form, and I'm going to push you so hard. And then for the next 20 weeks, we're not going to do it at all. It just seems like the client should say, well, hold on. It was so important that I was doing it perfectly before, and now we're not doing it at all. And that part of that is just me and my anal retentive nature, rather than what's actually great program design. So I'll stop talking there, and James can reflect and refute.
Just before James jumps in there, just curious, when you said pushing and pulling, were you also referring to vertical pushing and pulling as well as horizontal for every workout, right? And will you do, because I know you'll do kind of A/B workouts, so will you just, again, same principle, same objectives in the workout design, you're just maybe changing an exercise for that particular muscle group, just to provide some kind of novelty or some kind of something different to
Well, yeah for us, but it's a balance of what we would look at as volume, but also intensity. So if one workout has negative only chin-ups, let's say I'm literally designing James's workout, negative only chin-ups, he's going to have a ton of weight strapped to his waist. That's going to be a great lat exercise and a great bicep exercise. I'm probably not going to put a single joint bicep in that workout. The other workout, he's got pullover. I'm going to put a single joint bicep in that workout. If you don't put a single joint bicep in that workout, I'm going to say, what are you doing? James Fisher, if he walks out of the door after a 30-minute workout and we don't have any stimulation for his bicep, this is not acceptable. And so we're going to include the single joint bicep there. Where if in one workout we have a pull down and a row, you don't need to put the single joint bicep there. If the other workout only has one multi-joint or compound pulling movement, we might put the single joint bicep there. If you're doing a negative only dip here, don't worry about putting triceps in that workout because it's probably going to be incredible stimulation for the triceps. The workout over here just has an incline press, let's put the tricep there. So we're going to get that nuanced. What you have a negative only here, that's different than, hey, it's just a set of 12 normal repetitions here. We have a pre-exhaust here for the lats. We have a pullover followed by a negative chin up. We've hit the lats incredibly effectively in this workout. This workout, we might do something that we think is just mediocre for the lats, which is a normal set of medic seated row. So we're going to try to look at balance between the two. And have we overemphasized something in the two? Have we not provided the appropriate amount of intensity or volume for the muscle compartments? If we're doing what we call a 3 strikes protocol for lateral raise, which means you're doing 30 reps, you're going to failure, resting for 30 seconds, going to failure, resting for 30 seconds, going to failure, 30 total reps. That's enough shoulder there with the lateral raise. Don't add a shoulder press also. So the other workout's going to have a shoulder press, for example. If we have a dumbbell shoulder press in one workout and a machine shoulder press in the other workout, we might say, I think this client would benefit from some single joint shoulder. We don't have single joint shoulder anywhere. Where are we getting single joint posterior deltoid or lateral raise? I think a lateral raise is far superior to multi-joint pushing movement for the shoulders. Like if I did a big 5, I would never have overhead press in it. I always have lateral raise in it because I think lateral raise is so much better than shoulder press, especially if you're already including a pushing movement where you're getting some tricep. So we're going to push to have lateral raise in there. So it's looking at the two and saying, man, have we included everything we could possibly include to make this as comprehensive as possible?
That was great. Thank you for that. James, I'd love to hear your view on Luke's sort of templates there for workout design.
Yeah, I mean, Luke's got some really interesting points. It's quite funny. I'm going to start with what Luke said last and then work my way back through, if that's all right. If you said to me I can only have one shoulder exercise, I'd probably take an overhead press every day of the week over a lateral raise. But I think that's down to my personal preference because I always feel like I can move like a good weight with the overhead press. So I feel like it's like metabolically there's more happening and there's enjoyment in the exercise. But in fact, what Luke's saying is exactly right. There's probably much better deltoid activation from a lateral raise. Partly because if we do any other multi-joint shoulder, if we do an upright row, for example, we internally rotate our shoulders quite drastically. Now, I quite like an upright row because I think it's great for the traps, I think it's great for the posterior and the medial deltoids. But I think we've got to be very careful with it because it's abduction and internal rotation, and that's not a comfortable position for a lot of shoulders. If we take an overhead press, it might depend on the grip. If you externally rotate and abduct, then again, we've got an impingement position in the shoulder. Now, my shoulders feel pretty stable doing that, but I would probably have a preference to a narrower grip, which the MedX provides for more flexion extension basis. But then you would argue, well, so much of that is taken by the upper pecs and the anterior deltoids. But is there a lot happening with the medial deltoid? Well, scientifically, I can't tell you whether there is or isn't because I haven't done the research. But I think that a lateral raise ticks the boxes to say, hold on, if you want shoulders, this is just shoulders. So I think that's a great comment. I found it really interesting what Luke said about including an exercise for a certain length of time and then not being willing to remove it because how do you justify having done it? And the example Luke gave was the tibialis anterior, I think. Is that correct? Okay. So what I would argue against that, and I'm not I'm not saying that this is. I'm not saying that Luke shouldn't do it this way. I'm simply saying if I was playing devil's advocate, then I would say that there is a need for a baseline level of strength. There is a need for a degree of strength in all the muscles of the body. So let's take the lumbar extensors. If you've never trained the lumbar extensors properly before, then you should absolutely train on a Med-X lumbar extension machine. And it should be a Med-X because that's the gold standard of training the lumbar extensors. But if you've trained for the last 6 months, once a week, twice a week on the Med-X lumbar extension, then you can probably drop that down to once a fortnight and still have the same maintenance of strength. And your need to improve strength on that exercise is much less than it might be for other exercises because you're not going to continue improving strength. And the rationale I would give for that is when we've looked at elite powerlifters, so a back squat and a deadlift way beyond my wildest dreams, their lower back strength, happily, is not that much greater than mine. Okay? So their lower back strength is a requirement for what they do, but only to a certain point. And beyond a certain point, any additional low back strength does very little for them. So I would argue that it's probably true of other muscles as well, maybe such as the tibialis anterior, that they need to have a degree of stimulation for a certain frequency to develop them, to strengthen them, and so forth. But beyond a certain point, there isn't the same need to train them at such a frequency because you're simply at kind of a maintenance stage, which can be achieved with a lower frequency. Now, if you've got the equipment there, then why take it out when it's as easy to include? I completely agree with that. But if you don't have the equipment there, or if it's difficult to adapt that exercise based on what you do have, then maybe it's an exercise that you can accommodate missing out, especially if it's something like a tibialis anterior, where it's not really what you would call a large volume of muscle mass. So I think that there's a couple of things there I might disagree, and I'll pass back over to Luke to respond in a second, because there's one more thing. Luke, you said about a shrug. I'm interested as to why a shrug is so important in a Discover Strength workout. And as a side note, do you not think that there's sufficient stimulus of the upper trapezius by doing a lateral raise exercise?
Yeah, my answer would be no. And I mean, the only thing that we think approaches it is an upright row, which we've just started to use sparingly because maybe you influenced us, but Brad actually published a paper a couple of years ago that talked about how we can do an upright row and not have it be contraindicated. So we've used a little bit of upright row, but it's mainly shrug and it's maybe a scapular retraction on a seated row, and that's it.
Yeah. I find that really interesting. So if we look at what's called scapular humeral rhythm, so as we abduct our arm, and Luke's nodding because he knows this very well, but as we abduct our arm, in the last sort of, certainly as we get towards horizontal, in probably the last approximately 30 degrees, it's not a movement at the shoulder, it's a movement at the shoulder girdle, where our scapula will rotate as well. And our scapula rotates based on our serratus anterior, our lower traps pulling down on the scapula and our upper traps pulling across on the scapula. And the easy example of seeing this is if you ever ask somebody to do a lateral raise, if they've got good muscular definition, whether that's because of low body fat or large muscles, stand behind them and watch what happens to their traps when they do a lateral raise. So ironically, I really like a shrug exercise, and it's something that I would probably always look to include, but partly because I don't often include a lateral raise. As I mentioned previously, I tend to do a multi-joint. But I think what we're really getting at here is that if we're savvy over the exercises we include, then we know what muscles we've hit and the way in which we've hit them. So to the, Luke, for example, mentioned if you did heavy negative pull-ups, then you might not add a single joint for the biceps because you've probably created sufficient stimulus there. And I think that's exactly it. If, in my opinion, if I do an overhead press, then I probably need to do more for the traps in the form of a shrug. If I do a lateral raise, I can probably let the shrug go a little bit.
So James, you that's a really important point, and I would just articulate it, or add to it. When you look at a given exercise and how you're going to do it in the workout, I think you always have to think about the rest of the workout. So we always say, when a new trainer is training me, I say, hey, we're about to start chest press. All right, look at the rest of the workout design. Do I have any other chest today? There's no other chest in the workout. What does that tell you? That tells you that you have one shot to get everything out of this chest press. Where if I'm going to do, and there's plenty of workouts where I'll do a chest press and a pec fly and a dip, for example, or a chest press, maybe an incline. Later on, I'm doing some variation of a push-up. That trainer should know I have 3 shots to attack Luke's chest. Now, knowing the client, and Lawrence, you framed this up, we're talking about maximum hypertrophy, optimal strength. You got one shot at getting the most out of that chest press. If we're just doing chest press, then that means there's going to be advanced overload techniques, and we're gonna pull out all of the stops and just get after it on that chest press. And I think that's what James is referring to in just involvement of some of these other muscle groups. Hey, I know I'm going to get some stimulation on these other 2 exercises, so I just want to be mindful. Am I doing a shrug and a lateral raise? Am I only doing a lateral raise? Am I doing a shoulder press for the shoulder and that's it? There is no lateral raise. Then I need to think about shrug. So I think you have to think about all of these things in concert in terms of muscle involvement and recruitment, but also the intensity of that particular exercise and even the protocol that we apply to it. I mean, if you take me to positive muscle failure and have me stop on chest press, and that's my only chest in the day, I'm going to fire you as a trainer, right? I want to do more than that. I need some more stimulation than that. And that's the area where I have a lot of, I have hypothesis, and there's no research on this, is if Brad joined us right now, he jumped into this Zoom right now, he'd say, you need probably 6, 7, 8 sets or chest exercises in the workout. And I'm going to say, well, hold on. If I'm going to do just one, and this is what I'm doing in terms of advanced overload techniques and breakdown sets or really heavy negatives at the end of the set, how do you feel? How does that compare? I think that's where training the positive failure only is totally different than doing the same amount of volume, but adding some significant advanced overload techniques.
I completely agree with Luke, and I would even add, when you're looking, especially when you look at a very low volume workout, something like the Big 5, I would even be particular over the hand grip position, over the way you activate certain muscles. So, for example, if the only chest exercise I've got in the workout is a chest press, I'd probably looking for a grip where I feel it optimizes the chest. So I probably wouldn't go for a particularly narrow grip where I feel like there's a lot more tricep. If anything, I'd probably go for a slightly wider grip. So I felt like there was a big stretch at the back end of the movement. And I would probably add a single joint tricep. If I was doing multiple chest exercises, one of which being a dip, which is typically a parallel grip, then the chest exercise might then take a more horizontal grip. And the same for a pull-up versus a row. I'm a really big fan of a neutral grip pull-up right now. But with a TRX, I can adapt the row, so I can start with a pronated and come to a supinated grip. So it's not the same hand grip. And I think that's an important distinction in exercise selection as well. And these are really, a lot of people will look at this and say, boy, this is the minutia, right? But this is what we would like. This is the interesting part, and this is what can make the difference in enjoyment or stimulus or injury or comfort in a shoulder joint for different people. So I think that these are the details that trainers want to talk about, hear about.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just add that, James, the minutia is the job, right? The minutia is the job. There's only so many things we can do. I mean, some of the levers we're pulling are minutia, but it's mastering the minutia that makes clients want to train with you and makes anybody want to train with you. And I keep saying clients, forget that it's a business. I can name 20 different high intensity training practitioners that have taken me through a workout over the last 20 years. And the workout that they take me through, what I think of that workout largely comes down to their application or misapplication of the minutia. So the minutia is the job. It's part of being a resistance training practitioner. You just have to keep it in perspective, right? Where do we have a point of diminishing returns on pulling some of these different levers? And we have to qualify our statements that adding this or implementing this element that is minutia, I can't overpromise the results that it's going to produce. And I think that's what we have a problem in exercise is we think that manipulating some of those variables is absolutely going to stimulate adaptations that it is just probably not going to stimulate. So the minutia matters. We just need to be mindful of not overstating the benefit.
Yeah, I think you put that perfectly. That's kind of what I was, when James said about the minutia, I thought, I really want to say something to address that, but I think you just articulated it perfectly, Luke, just there. So no, thank you to both of you, actually. I think I've learned so much from this conversation. It's unbelievable. My brain's about to explode. And I've got sessions this evening, so I'll definitely be putting some of this stuff into practice. I'm just aware of time, and we're going to need to wrap it up. So Luke, best place for people to find out more about you?
DiscoverStrength.com, DiscoverStrengthFranchise.com. They can always shoot me an email at Luke@DiscoverStrength. And probably the social media platform I use the most is Instagram, and it's Luke Carlson 3070.
Great. And you, James?
James.Fisher@solent.ac.uk. I am on social media and Facebook and Twitter and everything else, which is at JPFisherUK. But to be honest, I don't use it very often. So I would get it and I would reply, but and there is also so much more to this that we've never got to, exercise order and recording workouts and things like that. So there's Lawrence, I'm going to say now, there's got to be a part 2 to this.
100%. Yeah. We'll organize some kind of series or something like that if you're both up for it. And for everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode and download a free PDF to help you attract more clients to your high intensity training business, please go to highintensitybusiness.com, search for episode 301. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.